Mm. All right, looks like we're here. All right. So far we did chapter 3. And if you go look at Blackboard, you'll see that next is chapter 4. Let's see, course readings right here. So we have the syllabus, chapter 3, and plus with the handwritten notes that I did last time are now posted there. And now we also have chapter 4. And of course, this is where it starts to get to the more important material. I mean, the really seriously important material, by which I mean supply and demand. And of course, supply and demand is at the heart and soul of all of economic analysis. So this is maybe the most important chapter in the whole course. So we're going to start that today. And we're going to see what are the determinants of supply and demand. And we're also going to see how to draw supply and demand curves. So that'll give us an opportunity to learn how this really works. But you'll see, I think that the supply and demand curves are very useful tools that help us analyze a whole range of problems in economics. So we're going to start with demand. Okay, now demand comes from consumers, of course. Supply actually comes from producers. And so we'll start with the individuals who are buying these products in the marketplace. And we'll begin by defining demand as the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded, holding everything else constant. Okay, now this is based on the assumption that when you walk into a store and you're looking to buy certain merchandise, you have some idea how much you're willing to pay for that. And if the price is different than you expected, you might be willing to buy more of that product. You might be willing to buy less, but you should have some sense of how much you think this product is worth to you. And that will ultimately determine how much you're willing to pay for it and how much of it you will actually buy. So what factors actually do determine the demand for a product? Well, there's at least 5 or 6 of them that we're going to mention here, 6 actually. And so we'll start by looking at, as you can see, tastes and preferences, consumer income, prices of related goods, expectations of the future price of the good, the number of consumers in the market, and expected future income. So there's a lot here, as you can see. So let me just scroll it back here for a second so you can see probably these first 2 are the most important. So we're listing them kind of in the order of most important to least important, but they're all important determinants of what exactly drives demand. All right. So now along the way, as we make up examples for these, I think you'll agree that a lot of this makes intuitive sense, but now what we're trying to do is put this all together into a formal theoretical framework that we can actually analyze with numbers. All right, so again, we have the 6 factors, and we're going to look at them one at a time. All right, so we start by looking at tastes and preferences. Now, obviously, you don't buy products unless you really will like them. I mean, that's the bottom line. The more people want of a product, the more they're going to buy of it. And so tastes are very subjective, of course. But if you look at the market as a whole, there are many products for which a large number of people are willing to buy that product. So what we do know, though, here is that tastes and preferences can change over time. All right, now, a perfect example of this is tobacco. Now, you're probably aware of the fact that, right now at this point in time, everybody is acutely aware that obviously smoking is incredibly harmful. So the number of people who smoke has been steadily declining for at least a few decades, partially because of new research showing how harmful it is, and partially because the governments have been imposing a lot of taxes on cigarettes in recent years. So that, for example, a pack of cigarettes that might have cost a couple of dollars 20 years ago could cost $10 or $12 now. So in general, the taste for tobacco has been going down over the last, let's say, 20, 30 years. On the other hand, people have become more and more aware of healthy eating. And so the demand for healthy products, like, let's say, organic foods, or let's say now there's this new trend towards raising animals more humanely. You can go into certain supermarkets and you can find that they go out of their way to tell you that, oh, the beef that we have here was raised, or the cattle were only fed with grass and this kind of thing. And so, 20 or 30 years ago, people might not have cared, but now they're more attuned to all these types of things. And so certain types of products are now more popular than ever, whereas other products are not as popular as they were in the past. And so what that does is it influences the amount that people are able and willing to buy. So we'll just make a very general statement here. If tastes for a good increase, the demand for that good will rise. And of course, that means people will buy more of that good. If consumer tastes decrease, then of course the demand for the good will fall. All right, that's pretty straightforward, I think. Because remember, ultimately, when you have to make a decision about how to spend your money, you're going to try to use your money to get the maximum satisfaction that you can, given what you can afford to buy. So, like I said, tobacco products, less and less tobacco is being sold at this point in time. But also, there's been an increase in the sale of, let's say, low-fat foods like chicken and other healthy foods because people have become more and more conscious about these issues. Classic example of this is avocados. 30 years ago, nobody bought avocados. Nobody even heard of them. Now, all of a sudden, they're all the rage. Everybody loves avocados. So, it changed. If you looked at the demand curve for avocados 30 years ago, it would be much different than it is today. Okay, so tastes do change over time, and they affect the demand for all these different products in the marketplace. Income. Now, obviously, the one thing that holds you back from buying everything that you want is your income. All right, we all know that. You certainly would like to have more things than you do have, and the only thing that stops you is the lack of income. So clearly, income is going to have a strong role in determining the demand for different products. Now, in economics, we're going to make an important distinction here between two types of goods. The first group, which is what most goods are, is normal. And in the second group, we have what are called inferior goods. And obviously, the name tells you more or less what you need to know. These are goods that we do not like very much, but we may be buying them simply because they're cheap. Okay, so how does this work? Well, first of all, a normal good is simply any good for which the demand increases when incomes rise. All right, so obviously, just about anything that you buy on a regular basis could be considered a normal good. Like, for example, pizza or gasoline. Like if you have more money, you might be tempted to drive more often. How about movie tickets or how about Broadway tickets? Those are very expensive. And so if your income starts to rise, you might be more likely to go buy a Broadway ticket. Oh, anything you can imagine. High-tech products. Like imagine yourself wanting to buy an iPad. You can't afford it now, but all of a sudden your income goes up and you find yourself able to buy one. So for the most part, just about all the products that you buy on a regular basis are considered to be normal because people will buy more of them as their incomes go up. But on the other hand, there are products where this is not true. These are the so-called inferior goods. Now, think of these as the goods that you only buy because you can't afford to buy something better. You need these products, but you're reluctant, only buying them reluctantly. All right, now what exactly are inferior goods? Here's a few examples. When you see a couple of these, I think you'll think of some other examples of your own. But we can say, for example, that how about cheap grades of gas? Now, when you pull up to the pump, you know that there's different grades of gas. Okay, specifically, if you've ever looked very carefully, there are numbers associated with the different grades of gas. They're typically 87, 89, and let's say 91. Now, what is it that separates these three grades? The 87 is somehow not as good as the 91. I do not understand exactly how this works, but I do know that the 87 gas is significantly cheaper in many cases than the 91. So if you're, let's say, still in college and you don't have a whole lot of money, you might find yourself always buying 87. But when you graduate and you're working and you have much more money, you might find yourself switching over to 91 because you can afford it, and it apparently is better for your car anyway. So we would say here that the 87 could be considered an inferior good because when your income goes up, you buy less of it, okay? And more of the 91, of course. So since consumers buy less 87 grade gas when their incomes rise, it is considered to be an inferior good. Okay, now how about some of these others that I mentioned here? Let's go to end here. Move these to the next slide. Generic drugs, what exactly does that mean? These are drugs that do not have a brand name or a well-known brand name associated with them. So like, for example, if you go into CVS, you'll see sitting on the shelf side by side, you've got Tylenol. And CVS painkiller. Now, if you read the box carefully, you'll realize that they are chemically the same thing, but the Tylenol is more expensive because it's a brand name. You see it advertised on TV, you know it very well. CVS is a generic because it has the label of the pharmacy on it. And so in general, people will buy less CVS painkiller. And of course, that means more Tylenol as their incomes rise. In other words, they start to feel like they'd rather have the Tylenol, and now that they can afford it, they'll switch away from the CVS painkiller to the Tylenol. And you can make that case for a lot of different products. Like if you go to any supermarket, they have an awful lot of products that have their own name on it. For example, let me add that category, generic foods. I guess we could add that to the list. Like, for example, imagine yourself looking at the shelf and you see a can of, let's think of the, how about Green Giant corn and Stop and Shop corn. And you look at them and say, well, it's Jolly Green Giant. So what's the difference between the two is that probably the Stop and Shop corn is significantly cheaper than the Jolly Green Giant corn. But again, Jolly Green Giant is a well-known brand name, and Stop and Shop, of course, is whatever it is. And so people will buy less Stop and Shop corn and more Jolly Green Giant as their incomes rise. Oh, there you go. Kellogg's versus Stop and Shop, a perfect example, because yes, they have their own brand of cereal too. And so again, if your income's rising, you're going to buy more of the Kellogg's and less of the Stop and Shop cereal, just because, you know, people feel like a brand name is more trustworthy. It's, let's say, there's less risk involved buying a brand name. Like, for example, if you buy the supermarket's own brand, I'm sure you found this out yourself, that sometimes the product is pretty good and sometimes it's not. There's no way of knowing without actually buying it. So you're taking a bit of a risk when you buy the supermarket's brand as opposed to the actual brand name. The reason why we can trust the brand name is because they've been in business for a long time. And so you know exactly what you're getting. And if their product wasn't good, nobody would buy it. So, and of course, you just go through all the shelves, and the store has many of their own items. And so we would say here in this case that the Stop and Shop corn is considered to be an inferior good in the sense that you'll buy less of it when your income goes up. That doesn't mean that the product isn't good. And here's the ironic part about all this, and this is something that we will discuss in a later chapter. The chances are that the Stop and Shop corn is being made by Jolly Green Giant anyway. It just has a different label on it. That's a little secret that maybe you didn't know about. With a different label, it is not uncommon for the major corporations who are selling products like Jolly Green Giant corn, they're also making the generic brands as well. And why is that? I mean, well, again, we'll have this conversation in a different chapter, but what they're really trying to do is they're trying to capture the market from people who are willing to pay a premium price for the Jolly Green Giant name and the ones who are not. So they cut a deal with Stop and Shop and say, listen, we'll sell you our corn with your label and we'll give it to you at a good price, and then you can sell it at a profit, so that consumers have a choice between the expensive Jolly Green Giant and the inexpensive Stop and Shop corn, but they're both often being made by the same company. You know, Stop and Shop does not make its own products. They're acquiring them from other companies and putting their label on it. So it may very well be that the two cans are identical to each other. It's just that they have different labels on them. And the perception is that the Jolly Green Giant can is better and therefore worth paying more for. Okay, so again, this is something we'll get back to in a later chapter. And then use textbooks. This isn't such a big deal anymore since you can buy electronic versions of textbooks now. It is a partnership, exactly. The supermarkets are constantly negotiating with all the manufacturers to produce these store brand products for them because it's profitable to both. Okay, Stop and Shop makes more money when they sell the corn under their own name, and Jolly Green Giant increases their market share when they sell that to Stop and Shop. So everybody benefits, and that's why you see so many store brands in the store, because it's such a lucrative arrangement for both the manufacturer and for the store. And it's the same thing, by the way, with the CVS and the Tylenol over here. Chances are pretty good that this CVS painkiller was actually made by Tylenol. And it's just that you don't realize it because you're seeing it in two different boxes. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's possible to actually find this out. You can maybe go to the internet and do some research, but if it's not being made by Tylenol, it's being made by one of the other major drug companies. It's not that CVS has its own little factory in the back of the store. They're getting it from somebody else, but they're putting their own name on it so that people who really and truly don't want to spend the extra money can have the painkiller from CVS. So again, it's a very profitable business for arrangement for both the manufacturer and the store. It gives people more choices. You know, let's say, this is very popular for low income people who really can't afford to spend a couple of extra dollars on Tylenol versus CVS. It really matters if you're retired, for example, or if you're just have a low income, and this can really make a big difference to your budget. And so they feel that they're also being helpful to low income people by doing this. It's not just the profits. You can see it as a way of helping out people who have lower incomes. Well, that's up to you. I mean, I can't guarantee you that they're both the same thing, but at least in the case of the Tylenol, they're chemically the same thing. The ingredients are exactly the same. What might be different, for example, is here the Tylenol might have a nice smooth coat to it that makes it easier to swallow than this one. But the actual chemical ingredients are the same. And you can see that just by reading the box. So if you just want to kill a pain, you just want to get rid of your headache. Like you're bringing up a good point. Like stores like, let's say, Costco. Has anyone ever heard of Costco? What's going on in Costco? What is their business model? They have you buy everything in bulk. And so by doing that, you can save a lot of money, but they have a lot of their own brand names. And it turns out, and I saw this on the internet, and it turns out their coffee is actually made by Starbucks. So when you're buying Costco coffee, you're actually buying Starbucks. But, they don't tell you that. They want you to think you're getting a bargain, which you are. But the thing about Costco, though, is that you can't just go in there and buy, let's say, a pound of coffee. Apparently, you have to buy enormous quantities of everything. But that way, if you do need those quantities, like let's say you have a large family and you're not, you buy a single pound of coffee, it'll be gone in an hour. It may pay for you to join a place like this and take advantage of the huge savings, because this is how Costco makes their money. They buy massive quantities of everything, which lowers their costs, and they can pass that savings along to you by having you also buy large quantities. if you don't need the large quantities, then you probably don't want to do this because, let's face it, let's say you have to buy a 10-pound bag of coffee. It might last you months if you're single or, just a couple, let's say. So, but yes, if you go into a store like that and they have all their own brand names, they're all made by somebody else. They don't manufacture anything themselves. It's just they've acquired the rights to sell this with their own brand name from somebody like Starbucks. So yeah, so now are you all, now the next time you go shopping, you'll look in the store with different eyes. You're going to look in them very carefully. But still, you don't know. Like when you go to buy the Stop and Shop cereal, maybe it was made by Kellogg's, maybe it was made by General Mills. You don't know. That's just the thing. There's a little bit of a gamble there still. But the perception, which is and reinforced by advertising, is that the brand name is better. And so they can charge a premium price for the brand name because people think that it's better, when in reality, it may not be. So if you're a bargain shopper, you'll have to investigate this. Just try out the store's brands and see which ones you like and which ones you don't like. And if you like something, there's no point in paying extra money for the brand name. Because again, like I said, that it was made by one of the big companies. Well, anyway, so now I've changed your shopping experience. So like I said, I don't really know if it's possible. It's possible that, let's check this out for a second. Let's see. Kirkland is their brand name. Some of it. All right. It says here some of it. All right. I don't know what that means, but apparently this is not a secret. Some of its Kirkland coffee is actually roasted by Starbucks, and it's blowing our minds. Yeah, you see that? According to MoneyWise, a ton of Kirkland products are manufactured by the big brands and then sold under the name, Kirkland name. Now he says here that in some cases it actually says it right on the label. Apparently, according to this, if you went to Costco to buy this coffee, it actually says on the label, custom roasted by Starbucks. How do you like that? It actually says it. Wow, that I didn't realize. Yeah, and now it's not always meant to be known by the public, but they're saying here that maybe they think that maybe the tuna fish is being made by Bumblebee and all the rest. But anyway, it's something you might want to investigate. All right, what else do we have here? I think I had one more. Textbooks. That's right, textbooks. So it used to be, before it was possible to have a PDF version of a textbook or an online version, all you had was two choices, new and used textbooks. Now, you know perfectly well, if you've been in the bookstore, that the price difference can be quite considerable. Suppose that, for example, the book for this class is $125 new versus, I don't know, $30 used. I'd have to look into that. So what exactly is going on here? Well, the thing is, why would you ever buy a used book? Nobody wants a used book, of course, because somebody else has written in it. They may have spilled things on it, things like that. So people only buy used textbooks because they can't afford the new ones. Okay, so as their incomes rise, let's say that somehow you found yourself with more money next year because, let's say, I don't know, you worked during the summer and you really did very well. Then when you come back in the fall, you might find yourself not willing to buy the used textbooks. They buy fewer used textbooks so that used textbooks are considered to be inferior goods. Let me clean that up a little. That's better. Okay, you get the idea. Well, now it's different. You can do everything electronically. You can have one that's available online, which is, to me, the way to go, because you always have it with you. As long as you have your phone with you, with a Kindle app on it or something similar, you can always read your book. And so you not only don't have to carry it around, but you can't lose it. And it's brand new any way you look at it. So, but that's only a relatively recent innovation. I think that these types of electronic textbooks have only been available for maybe 20 years or so at the most. Prior to that, everything was done with physical books, and it was two choices, new and used. And you could typically find yourself in the first day of school spending a lot of time standing in line. Oh yeah, that's right. You can rent too. That's interesting how they turn that into a new market. Um, if you take good care of your book, you can sell it back to Amazon and they'll rent it to other people, and you can save even more money, but you don't get to keep it then. And what's really interesting is you can actually rent the electronic versions too. That seems a little strange, but that usually indicates that you have no intention of using it after you finish that course. But it's nice to know that that option is there, because let's face it, you don't want to keep every book you had in college. Some of them are going to be useful, and a lot of them are not, as you already know, I'm sure. Like when I was in college, I kept all of my math books, but that was about it. I sold the other ones back to the bookstore. All right. Well, anyway, so that's this topic in a nutshell. Now, here's another interesting category. When you go to the store, especially a supermarket, they're enormous. Supermarkets just keep getting bigger all the time because it makes sense for people to get everything they need in one store. Nobody has time to waste on a lot of shopping. So when they go shopping, they want everything to be right there in the same store if it can be arranged. So we know that stores keep getting bigger and bigger, which means you have more and more choices when you go shopping. Now, that means when you look at a product, you might say, I want to buy this product, but I'd like to know what else is available. And maybe I'll think about buying something else. So we're thinking now that there are two basic ways in which goods can be related to each other. They can be what we call substitutes, and they can be complements. Okay, so now, and that's only for related goods. A lot of goods are unrelated to each other, but goods that are similar, like for example, Coke and Pepsi, you could think of them as related goods because they're both sodas, okay, and they're both colas. And if you like one, the chances are pretty good you'll like the other one. But let's say we're thinking about Coke and lettuce. Well, clearly they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So we're not considering those cases here. We're only looking at goods that fall into one of these two categories: substitutes and complements. Okay, so we'll start with the substitutes. These are simply goods that satisfy the same needs, like Coke and Pepsi. Now, they're not literally identical to each other, but let's say you go to the store to buy a Coke and they're all out. Most people will buy the Pepsi. It's not that big of a difference. In fact, it's my opinion that many people, without the labels, would not actually be able to tell the difference. There's some interesting research being done on TV about this. And if they put cups of soda in front of people without a label, a very large percentage of them cannot tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi. Now, you may not be in that category, but the reality is they're not that much different from each other. Then we have, of course, Big Macs and Whoppers. And again, they're not identical, of course not, but they're similar items and they satisfy the same need. You're hungry, it's lunchtime, you're in a hurry. You can, let's say you're in a mall where they have both a McDonald's and a Burger King. You would consider either one to be acceptable. We also have PCs and Macs. Now, again, they're both computers. They're not identical, as you know, but they both do the job. So sometimes what you might discover is that, you're looking at Macs and you say, well, they're kind of expensive. Maybe I'll do the PC. But then, of course, you also know people where they have to have one or the other. Because let's face it, they are different. And, you get comfortable with one or the other. But still, ultimately, they're both computers. So we could think of them as substitutes. And I am sure you could come up with a million examples of substitutes. Like, I don't know. Let's see if we can dream up some more. All right, here we go. Oh, really? No kidding. How many? that surprises me a little bit. That, yeah, because when usually most stores either have one or the other. It's very rare that you have a store that has both. So, well, people actually say, don't give me a drink at all because they, oh my God, that surprises me to no end. Because no, of course they're not the same. But I mean, really, imagine now they're going to eat pizza and they're going to have a dry mouth because they refuse to drink the Pepsi. That really is a very surprising thing to me.
Yeah, it's actually really annoying.
I bet it is because you probably are giving them a deal anyway. The drink, and the
Hmm.
pizza are a certain price. Wow. But that raises another interesting point. You may wonder why they don't have both of them. Well, because typically what happens is they cut a deal with one or the other to be their exclusive provider. And in exchange for that, they get a better deal on the product. It's like with colleges. If you've ever noticed, like it's been so long since I've been at the school. I'm pretty sure that we only have Pepsis on the campus, but you'll notice that every college either has Coke or Pepsi. They never have both. Why is that? Because usually what a manufacturer will do, so come to the school and say, listen, if you agree to only have Pepsi, let's say, we'll give you, let's say, and it could be anything. It could be a sign for the football stadium. It could be anything you could imagine. And so they're basically providing goodies to the school in exchange for the exclusive rights to sell their soda on the campus. And so every school picks one or the other, and you can tell because usually there's signs somewhere with ads on them that are either Coke or Pepsi, and that means the school made a deal with that company. So you'll never go into the vending machines and see both Coke and Pepsi side by side. It's always one or the other. These companies, this is how they make their money. They try to basically muscle into each other's territory and try to obtain exclusive rights for them to sell their product at the expense of the other company. So maybe you never noticed that. Oh, here's a good one. Apple iPhone versus Samsung Galaxy. Now, they're both cell phones. They're not identical, though. But usually people pick one or the other, but you could, in principle, switch from one to the other. Yes, exactly. I like that example. I'm going to put that one in here for future classes. iPhone versus Samsung. They've been advertising a lot lately about how cool their camera is. I don't know if it's true or not, but I wouldn't switch just to get a different camera. I think that the issue there is that they really are different from each other. And if you did switch, you probably have to learn all over again how to use it. But I don't know that much about it. Has anyone here ever tried to switch back and forth between those two? No, you tend to get one or the other and stick with it. It's like with cameras. I don't know if anyone here has an actual physical camera. Yes, they still make them, but the phones are getting so good that people are buying fewer and fewer cameras. But here's how clever these camera manufacturers are. If you have an actual camera, it has lenses that you can attach and detach and change them, which is one of the advantages of having a real camera. You can use different lenses with it. But if you have a Canon camera, the lenses only work with Canon cameras. If you have a Nikon, the lenses only work with Nikon. So if you own a lot of lenses and they're very, very expensive, you're not going to switch because you would have to buy all new lenses. And this is how they make sure that they try to establish loyalty among people, that so that in others, some people say I'm a Canon person, and the other group says I'm a Nikon person, and the two will never mix or change, partially because they get used to their cameras, but also because of the expense of switching. So that's a very interesting situation where they make it difficult for you to switch. That way, once you own a Canon, you'll never have an incentive to switch to Nikon or vice versa. So anyway, these are all considered to be substitutes. Now, why does that matter? Well, think about this. Suppose that you go to the supermarket and you're looking for 2-liter bottles, okay? Suppose you go to the supermarket wanting to buy a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. Now, you know perfectly well, when you walk down these aisles, they're all the same price. Maybe one of them is on sale, but pretty much they're all the same price. Let's say the standard price in Stop and Shop is $1, I don't know, 29. Okay, today you notice that Coke is on sale for 99 cents. What are you likely to do? Well, not everybody, but what do you think most people will do when they see this? Many people, okay, here we go. That's right. Many people will buy the Coke because the price is lower. And again, we know that they're not exactly the same, but you know what? For many people, it's almost like, well, they're more or less the same, aren't they? So I want to take advantage of this lower price. So therefore, when Coke goes on sale, I buy less Pepsi and more Coke. So many people buy the Coke because the price is lower, which means buying less Pepsi. On the other hand, if the Coke, well, that's all right. Let's keep this example here. So what I wanted to do is just summarize this by saying that the demand for a good will increase if the price of a substitute rises. The demand for a good will decrease if the price of a substitute good falls. So in our example, the demand for the Pepsi went down because the price of the Coke went down. All right. So, you can memorize this if you want to, but I think it's more important to understand it. So if people see Coke and Pepsi as being substitutes, if Coke gets more expensive, people buy more Pepsi. If Coke gets cheaper, people buy less Pepsi. And that's how we know that they're substitutes, when we see this kind of behavior. Does that make sense? Yes, because people are very price conscious, or many people are very price conscious, especially when they see these as being substitutes. Now, this works well for Coke and Pepsi because, first of all, they're not that expensive to start with, but they're seen as what we're going to call close substitutes, meaning they're more or less the same thing. In other cases, maybe the two goods are not that closely related, and maybe this won't happen, but for goods where they are clearly very closely related, this is exactly what we would expect to see. And I'm sure this has happened to you too. You go in there with your intention of buying one thing, and then you notice the prices are different and you end up buying something else. This is the reason, by the way, why the Coke went on sale. They're trying to take business away from Pepsi. Now, next week, it might be the other way around. The Coke is back to the normal price and the Pepsi's on sale. It happens all the time, especially in supermarkets. You know that they're constantly fiddling around with their prices because they're trying to figure out the exact price at which they can maximize their profits. So they change the price, they see what happens, and then they change it again, and they keep changing it. And eventually they'll settle on the best possible price. But you notice that they do spend a lot of time advertising. They send out flyers in the mail and they try to say, hey, come on over here, come to the store today because Pepsi's on sale or Coke's on sale. Because they hope that once you get in the door, yes, you'll buy all that extra Pepsi or Coke, but then you'll buy more of everything else too. Okay, so in other words, their job is to get you in the store. Whatever they have to do to get you in the store, they're going to do it because they make their money in volume. So in other words, if you buy items in a supermarket, each individual item gives them very little profit. But if you buy a lot of food, a lot of products, then they start to make money. Okay, so it's kind of like fast food restaurants. The profit that they make on each item they sell you is pretty small. But if you keep coming back and keep buying over and over again, that's how they make their money, with volume. They want you to keep coming back and back and back. And so even if each item gives them a small amount of profit, it does add up after a while. Okay, so supermarkets, fast food restaurants, their strategy is to just do whatever it takes to get you in the store. They want to increase the volume that you're buying. That's how they make their money. Okay, now, as you know, there are other businesses where the opposite is true, where they make a lot of money on each item that they sell, but they just don't sell a lot. For example, you probably are aware that there's a Tiffany's in the Westchester Mall. Everybody knows Tiffany's. What are they famous for? Jewelry, and especially diamonds. If you want a really expensive wedding ring, that's where you go. But if you've ever walked past the Tiffany's in the Westchester Mall, you'll see that it's very rare that they have more than one or two customers in there. So what happens is occasionally they sell a ring, but when they do, maybe 50% of it is profits. Okay, so in other words, their job is to sell a small amount of extremely profitable merchandise. And that's how they make their money. Whereas McDonald's, they make very little money every time you walk in the store, but if you keep coming back, they will make money because eventually all those sales will translate into profits for them. All right, now here's another substitutes. Now this one, now the supermarket example is really good because you're standing there and the items are right next to each other and it's easy to see the two different prices. If like in this example, you may not be willing to drive down the street to go to Burger King if you see that the Big Macs have gotten more expensive, at least not in the short run, but eventually if this persists, you'll find yourself going to Burger King more often and McDonald's less often. But still, people are very acutely aware of prices. And if you're expecting the price to be something and you see it changes, you're going to at least think about doing something different in the future. So if suddenly McDonald's gets crazy and they raise the price of their Big Macs, they'll lose some of their business to Burger King because people will switch out from the Big Macs to the Whoppers. But on the other hand, if they have a promotion with Big Macs, somehow, let's say they bundle it together with fries and give you a sweet deal, you're likely to get people leaving Burger King and coming back to McDonald's. And that's because people see these as substitutes. All right, substitutes. Now, so I think we all understand the concept of substitutes. What else is there? All right, if you remember my list that I had before, we also mentioned this word complements. Now, whenever you run across this word complements, it usually means two things go together somehow. Like, what would be a good example of this? Let's say that, I don't know, like with clothes, sometimes you might say that, I don't know, you have a certain pair of sunglasses and somebody says, why they complement your shirt, your clothes very nicely or something. But here, what we're talking about is goods that tend to be consumed together as if they were one unit. Okay, classic example, peanut butter and jelly. Okay, when you were a kid, did you eat a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? Yes, you did, and you probably still do. What? It's like a marriage made in heaven, isn't it? Peanut butter and jelly. What could be better? Would you ever eat just a plain old jelly sandwich? Probably not. Would you ever eat a peanut butter sandwich? Maybe not. But when they go together, it's so nice. So those would be defined as complements or complementary goods. And I'm sure, again, you can think of a million examples like French fries and ketchup. Cars and gasoline. Well, your car wouldn't be worth very much without gasoline. Computers and software. There's all kinds of things you can think of where you tend to consume them together. And by the way, if you've ever seen that movie Pulp Fiction, you know that not every country agrees with this. In some countries, people put different things on their French fries. Like in the movie, if you've ever seen it, there's a scene where John Travolta is telling Samuel L. Jackson that he was in France and he was revolted to see people put mayonnaise on their French fries. He was like, I can't believe it. I saw them. I actually saw them do it. That's not a bad idea. They have ketchup mixed with mayo. I see. Yeah, that to me is beyond disgusting. To me, fries, if they're salted properly, shouldn't need anything. At most, a touch of ketchup because they're awfully good by themselves. You start mixing that with milk, now you're asking for trouble, in my opinion. Yeah, no, fries were meant for salt and ketchup, and that's it, baby. I don't see mayonnaise going on there at all either. I agreed with him. Yeah. Garlic mayo, okay, I can kind of see that, but I'd still rather have the ketchup. Yeah, if you've ever been to a restaurant in a foreign country, you notice in the United States, there's always ketchup within easy reach. They assume everybody wants it. But in foreign countries, not necessarily. May have to ask for it. So, yeah, it's kind of a cultural thing. Um, by the way, if you've ever been to Canada, they have this thing called poutine, which is French fries with gravy. And it's apparently, I've never had it, but apparently it's incredibly popular. But I can imagine each bite probably has 8,000 calories in it. But has anyone here ever experienced poutine? It's very popular in Canada and maybe the upstate New York because it's right on the border. It's like the national dish. No, is anyone here from Canada? Okay, well, all right. Well, one of these days you'll bump into it somewhere. You don't tend to find it around here. It hasn't really caught on, but I mean, in principle, it sounds awful, but apparently it's really tasty. And so in Canada, they would say that gravy and fries are complements because they belong together. Now, what does this have to do with demand? Well, think about this. Suppose that for some weird reason, suppose that French fries suddenly become much more expensive. Let's say there's some problem with the potato crop, suddenly become much more expensive. What would this do to the demand for ketchup? It would go down, exactly. People would buy less ketchup, even though the ketchup price didn't change. They would buy less ketchup because they are buying less French fries. It's fewer. And that's the reason for it. So the demand for ketchup is being affected by the price of French fries because the ketchup, as far as people are concerned, belongs on the fries. Yeah, exactly. So that's how you know that fries and ketchup are considered to be complements because when the price of the fries goes up, the demand for the ketchup goes down. So there we go. We've got two ways in which the prices of what we called related goods have an influence on the demand for other products. So now I did mention these are only for related goods. Or here's a good one. Rising gas prices hurts new car sales, especially guzzlers like SUVs. And again, it's because gas and cars are complementary goods. If gas is more expensive, we're less likely to buy new cars. Okay, and that's, you can see that in the news when gas prices do go up, which they haven't in a long time. You see that new car sales always suffer because people are less likely to buy them. Okay, so just to summarize, the demand for a good will decrease if the price of a complementary good goes up and vice versa. Okay, now if we're looking at unrelated goods, then the price of one unrelated good will not influence the demand for the other good. Of course not, because they have nothing to do with each other. So remember, this is just for related goods. All right. So now we've still got more factors to look at. How about this one? Now, when we buy products, we have some sense of how much of it we're willing to pay, how much we're willing to pay for that product. But we also may have ideas about what the price of that product might look like in the future. For example, if you're thinking about buying a big ticket item like a TV or a car, you may be worried that if you wait, that the price will go up in the future. So you may decide to buy the item before that actually happens. Or you might think that something might go on sale in the future, like iPhones. They tend to get cheaper after they've been out for a long time. Like right now, you could probably get I think the 12 is out. Yes, it is. So you probably could get a deal on the 11, which you would not have been able to get when it first came out. So if you are willing to wait, you can often get bargains, especially with high-tech products. So in general, if consumers expect the price of a good to be higher in the future, they will buy more of it today, and vice versa. Yes. Oh, is it $200 cheaper? Yeah, I figured as much, because they want to move them. They want to get rid of that inventory because it's taking up space, and they want to get ready for the next one. So they start to say, well, we still got all these unsold iPhone 11s. Why don't we offer people a sweet deal on them, because we need to get rid of them before the next version comes out. And if you know that, you can play the game too. You can hang on and wait and wait and wait until it gets cheaper. And then you jump in when it gets really cheap before the next one comes out. That works well because the reality is some people absolutely must always have the latest version of everything, and they won't do this. But if you're more frugal, let's say you're just interested in the phone, not whether it's the newest version, then you can sit there and wait. And when it does get really cheap, then you can jump in and buy it at a lower price. So you're going to wait. Like if you really believe this is going to happen, you'll hold back and you'll buy it only when it gets cheaper. So your demand today will actually be lower than it would have been if you didn't have this expectation. So again, now, sometimes these expectations are triggered by external events, like perfectly well what happens in the supermarkets if you hear a rumor that we're going to have a huge snowstorm. The first thing that happens is that the shelves empty themselves out of water and other supplies. People just buy up all the water because they think there's going to be a storm. But what if you heard a rumor that the orange crop was ruined by bad weather? What might people be tempted to do? They might run to the store and scoop up all the orange juice. Why would they do that? You hear it on the radio, there's bad weather in Florida this year. The orange crop was largely damaged. Why would you run to the store and buy orange juice? Because if that happened, if the orange supply was ruined, that means the price of orange juice will go up in the future because it becomes more expensive to make it. So you say to yourself, pretty soon the price of orange juice is going to go up. Therefore, I'll buy it today before that actually happens. Or on the other hand, if you hear that there was a bumper crop of oranges in Florida, it was the best crop they've ever had, that means the orange juice prices might start to fall, and you may decide to wait until that happens to buy more orange juice. So we're just saying here that people's decisions as to what to buy may depend not only on what the price is now, but what they expect it to look like in the future. Now, of course, you might end up being wrong. I mean, a lot of times when you hear stuff in the news like, oh my God, we're going to have a huge storm and you won't be able to get out of your house for a month. It turns out not to be the case. And then hopefully sanity prevails again, but it can drive people's decisions, especially if they're panicking. So yeah, the orange juice is the best example I could come up with because the price can fluctuate due to weather. If the price of a new computer, now, like the newest MacBook Pro, let's say they bring it out today, in next year when they're ready to bring out a new version, most likely they'll be willing to sell the older version at a lower price. And so if you wait long enough, you can get a better deal. And if you know that, and if you're patient, you can save a lot of money. All right, that one's pretty self-explanatory. Or like, imagine if this local supermarket always puts sodas on sale on the first week of every month. Well, then you're going to wait and buy your sodas during the first week of every month. All right, so they want to avoid becoming too predictable, but they do constantly tinker around with those prices. Number of consumers. Now, just the mere fact that, think about Coca-Cola. Everybody likes Coke, basically. All right. So as the population grows, what happens to the demand for Coke? Well, just the mere fact that there are more people means that there will be a greater demand for Coke. It's just that simple. More people means more demand. All right. Or if, let's say, in some Western European countries, the population is actually shrinking because the birth rates are very low. In those countries, the demand might actually be falling. Okay. So anywhere where there's less people than there were before, there's going to be a smaller demand for that product. All right. Let's see. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. And then finally, now we've already seen that our incomes can have a strong influence on our demand for a product, but we also may have some sense of what our income is likely to be in the future. This is especially important, like if you're in college, you know perfectly well that your income will be higher when you graduate down the road. So that might influence the timing of decisions like when to buy a new car, for example. So let's say that you have just graduated and you've just accepted a job offer, and the job doesn't start for, let's say, a month. You might decide to go into the dealer and buy a new car now, because while you don't have any money right this minute, you know that you will, or you believe you will have more money in the future. And so you decide to go ahead and buy the car now rather than waiting. So in general, when people expect their incomes to go up in the future, or else their credit, they will increase their purchases now in anticipation of having more income in the future. Now, they may turn out to be wrong, but a lot of people at least will say, I expect my income to go up next year. Therefore, I can feel free to buy more things than I would have otherwise. And then on the other hand, and if somebody gives you an increase, let's say your credit card company says, oh, you've been so good this year, we've increased your credit line by $1,000. What do you think most people are going to do? You know what they're going to do. They're going to go right to the mall and start spending it, because spending is fun. There's no question about that. Everybody agrees on that one thing. Yes, they're going to treat themselves like, well, I know that I'll have to pay for it, but that's okay. I've got access to more credit. Therefore, I'm going to have fun with it, because buying things is fun. Having things is fun. Waiting is not fun. It might be the right thing to do, but it's not fun, is it? It is not. All right. So with all of this put together, we can now draw our first curve for this chapter, and that is the demand curve. So we can tie all this information together, and with a single curve, summarize all of this useful information. And what it shows us is how much of a good are people willing to buy at every possible price of that good. So I've come up with an example of this. Oh, it's easy to draw. Don't worry about that. If you're not an artist, it doesn't matter. These curves are not hard to draw, but our job is to understand them. So we're going to look at the demand for pizza in the United States. Now, this is the demand for the entire country, and everybody loves pizza. That's another universal. There's a few products that everybody adores, and this is one of them. All right. You might occasionally meet people who don't like it, but that's very rare. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to start with what's called a demand schedule, which is a chart which shows how much people are willing to buy at every possible price. All right, let's take a look at it. So on the left, we have the price of a pizza, which we've got all the possible values from $0 to $20. And over here is the quantity demanded, measured in millions per day. So remember, this is for the whole country. Now, what do you notice about these two columns of numbers? What is it that jumps off the page at you? What are we seeing here? What happens to the quantity demanded when the price goes up? That's right. And of course, it makes perfect sense that at a very low price, people buy more pizzas. As the price goes up, they buy less. That's the way it works. Okay, now this can be turned into a graph. This is what it looks like. It's just a straight line. But the key here is that it is downward sloping, or you could say that it has a negative slope. The intercepts here, for example, this is how much pizza, this is the price when people do not buy any pizzas. Down here is the quantity people would take if it was free. Okay, in other words, here, the price is 20, but the quantity is 0. Whereas down here, the price is 0, but the quantity is 10 million. So we always have in economics the price on the vertical axis and the quantity on the horizontal axis. Okay, so you're going to see this a lot in economics. Price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. Now, this is a bit of a point of controversy. In the 19th century, when microeconomics was still in its infancy, some economists thought that it should be the other way around. But the most famous economists of the day, Alfred Marshall, thought that this was the way to go. And so we from now on and forever and ever, will have price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. So this tells me, and I could identify from this curve at any point how much somebody is willing to buy, or how much the country is willing to buy for every given price. Now, I do want to mention here that implicitly, and it doesn't say this here, but I'm going to mention this right now, the curve is based on the assumption that everything else, everything except for the price, is being held constant along this curve. In other words, when we're on this curve, at every point in this curve, our income is the same. The prices of related goods are the same. Our expectations are the same. So the only thing we're allowing to change here is the price. And then we can see the corresponding change in the quantity. Everything except for the price is being held constant. Now, one of the implications of this is that if a factor other than the price changes, and we'll see more of this in a little while, the entire curve will shift to a new position. So again, we're going to do this, but not just yet. All right, so in other words, if we move up and down that same curve, everything except the price is being held constant. But once something else does change, the entire curve will shift to a new position. Okay, so those are the two key details we want to keep in mind when we look at this curve. All right, so the demand curve is based on what people are willing and able to spend on different products. Okay, so this is coming from the consumer's perspective. And remember, the consumer's job is to get the maximum satisfaction out of every dollar that he or she spends. I mean, because your money is scarce. I mean, let's face it, you don't have that much money. And so you want to get the best value for every dollar you spend. Now we're going to switch over to the perspective of the producers of this product. In this case, the pizzerias. And their job is to maximize their profits. All right. So they're trying to make a living from this. And so they've got to maximize their profits. So they have to give you a product that you want, but they have to do it in such a way that they can earn a profit. So we're going to now consider the supply of the good. All right. And this comes from the producers, in this case, the pizzerias. And just like with the demand curve, this is showing me the relationship between price and quantity, except that it's not the quantity demanded, it's the quantity supplied. And again, with this curve, we're going to hold everything else constant. All right. So now this one is harder. Now the demand is easy for you to think about in terms of your own personal experience because you're all consumers. You all have a demand for all these different products that are in the marketplace. You know perfectly well how you react to changes in prices or income. All right. But supply is different. Unless you've actually run a business, it's a little bit more difficult to visualize what's going on here, but it shouldn't be too bad. It's just that you may not have actually experienced this yourself. Because remember, all you're really trying to do is make money. So the factors that influence the supply are different than the ones that influence demand. So what do I mean by that? Let's look at some of these factors. Well, we've got productivity. Now, productivity refers to our ability to convert resources into goods and services. Productivity is an extremely important idea. And you know this yourself. I mean, you know, some days you really feel like you could accomplish anything. You're so energetic and you're studying and you're getting your work done and everything's going just great. And then there's other days where you feel kind of mopey and you're like, oh, I don't want to do anything. And those are days when your productivity is much lower. It happens. Okay. You've got your good days and your bad days. But in business, productivity has to be kept as high as possible in order to make profits. And you know, you can not so much in the pizza business, but in other areas like computers, productivity is heavily dependent on technology. So as technology improves, what starts to happen to the ability of Apple, let's say, to make MacBook Pros? It keeps improving. And you know perfectly well that even if the price doesn't change, a MacBook Pro built in 2021 is going to be better than one that was built in, let's say, 2017. Because in the meantime, technology has improved. So that in turn increases Apple's productivity, and they can afford to give you a really sophisticated computer at a relatively low price. Okay. Now, the next one is input prices, which refers to the cost of production. So let's go back to the example of the pizzeria. What kind of things do they need to make pizza? Well, how about, let me just mention that here. Yeah, I'll throw that in here right here. As an example of input prices, a pizzeria needs several inputs to produce price. All right, let's make it like this. Needs the following inputs to make pizza. Well, what's the most important? Well, they need dough, flour to make the dough. They need tomatoes. They need cheese, olive oil, and probably herbs. They may put oregano on your pizza. And of course, they need labor. Somebody's got to be back there making the pizza, and then they need pizza ovens. You can't do this by yourself. You need to have a pizza oven. So the first 3 or 4 ingredients, those are the actual food items that go into this process, but you also need labor and pizza ovens. So if any of these items suddenly becomes much more expensive, what would happen to our ability to make pizza? Well, it would become more expensive, that's for sure. Let's say suddenly there's a shortage of flour and the price triples. Oh no, what are we going to do? We use tons of flour in making pizza. Therefore, yes, exactly. Sadly enough, the only way we can make a profit now is to pass along that price increase to our customers. So the cost of the pizza will go up, and our ability and willingness to supply the pizza will go down. All right. So we'll discuss this in more detail later on. Obviously, we're running out of time today, but that's going to make things more difficult for us. Yeah. And then the customers might walk out the door. That's right. That's why this is such a problem for the store, because customers don't like that, do they? No. Especially at this point in time, or that's a good idea. They might make it smaller. In fact, that raises an interesting question. You may not be aware of it, but candy bars used to be much bigger than they are now. And what happened was in the 70s, sugar suddenly became much, much more expensive than it had previously been. So rather than driving away the customers by raising the prices of candy bars, the candy companies just shrunk them, and they kept shrinking them until they have what we have now. But if you could see how big they used to be, you'd say, oh my God, what happened? Well, it's more profitable to make smaller candy bars because sugar became much more expensive. And also, let's face it, it's not healthy to eat candy bars. Yeah. Um, but people buy them because, in fact, there's a lot of psychology involved with choosing prices for products. If you've noticed in the supermarket, the candy bars are up at the front and the cash register there. Why do they put them there? Why don't they put them on the shelves with everything else? Why would the candy bars be in the front of the store at the cash register? Because it's what we call an impulse purchase. You did not go to the store to buy. Yes, they do. Exactly. The amount of chips in a bag is not what it used to be. But when you go to the front and you say, oh, wait a minute, look, they have Hershey bars here. I'll take one of those too. You didn't come to the store with the intention of buying candy bars, but you happen to notice it on the way out. And so because they're not that expensive, you may just reach in there and grab a few. And this is what they're expecting you to do. The small, inexpensive items are sitting right in front of you where you can see them, and they're hoping that you'll be tempted to buy them just because they're right there and they're cheap. And so we call that an impulse buy. And that's one of the reasons why candy bars, they can't afford to let them get too expensive because many of them are bought on impulse purchases. So instead of having a huge bar that's $3 or $4, they'd rather sell you a small one for $1 because that's going to make it more likely that you'll grab it on the way out of the store. Okay. So anyway, but yes, so input prices refer to the costs of producing this product. And again, there's a lot of there's ingredients that go into the pizza, but we also have labor. And the pizza ovens, by the way, are a form of what we call capital, physical capital. Without that oven, there's not going to be a pizza. That's for sure. All right. So anyway, now, is there more? Oh, yes, we have a few more, but I'll tell you what, it's getting kind of late here. Why don't we come back to this on Monday? And we'll start again with this part, this discussion about the factors that determine supply. And then that will enable us to draw our supply curve. And eventually, we're going to see something interesting. We're going to bring together the supply and demand curves. And you'll see that a lot of the analysis that we do in economics comes down to the relationship between supply and demand. Okay, so I'll tell you what, let's knock it off right here. It is, after all, Friday morning, and we have a lot of fun ahead of us this weekend, I hope. And so I'll see you all on Tuesday, not Monday, Tuesday. I think I said Monday by mistake. Okay, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On Tuesday.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Oh, yes. Yes, I deal. Well, no, don't. We're not going to get that far. 4 is fine. Just read chapter 4. You can read 5 if you want to, but I think it'll be a while before we're finished with chapter 4. It'll probably take all of next week before we're done with it. But I won't stop you. I won't say no, but it won't. It's not necessary.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
Have a good weekend.
All right. You too.